Hey everyone, Jonathan Sriranganathan here, the Greens candidate for Mayor of Brizzy, and welcome back to another discussion about reimagining the city and our election campaign for Brisbane City Council and Greens political organising and staff. I'd like to acknowledge the rightful owners of country, the Yagara and Turrbal people, pay respects to their elders past and present, and remind myself that those acknowledgements shouldn't just be tokenistic, that they actually need to sort of ground and inform our political advocacy and organising and everything we do as sort of, I'm a settler, I'm a non-Indigenous person, and it's important for me to be mindful of how I can uplift and empower First Nations peoples rather than speaking for them. Thanks for joining us again. Today I'm chatting with River Kearns, who's our candidate for Tennyson ward in the upcoming council election. River, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about where you grew up and where you're from and stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd also love to second your acknowledgement of country. We do live on stolen land, and I do feel it's really important to go forward always with that of front and centre, that we don't just leave it aside with acknowledgements and stuff and act like that's tokenistic. We need to move forward with that. My name's River. I go by they, them pronouns. I am a student. I'm studying a justice diploma at TAFE, and I'm really inspired by that because I dislike that whole institutionalized system of justice, and I got into it because I want to learn how it runs so I can understand how to dismantle it and work in that whole space so we can actually drive good change and help people rather than just conforming to an institutionalized system.
Yeah, cool. And you grew up in Brizzy?
I grew up in the sunny coast,
cool.
I was born in Nambour and raised in Nambour, on Gubbi Gubbi, Kabi Kabi country.
Cool.
And I've, a lot of issues up there, like lack of public transport and stuff like that. I was living there for 18 years of my life, and I moved down to Brizzy just because I wanted to study and also work. And there wasn't really as many areas or things that played to my strengths up there, I'd say, that I could go into. But I've been living in Brizzy since 2021, and I've now moved down further south side,
Yeah, cool. And what drew you into Greens activism and Greens organising? Like, I think you're 21, right? So you're probably our youngest candidate who's running in the election campaign this time around. Like, what inspired you to put your hand up and get involved in that way?
Well, I've just been seeing for many years of just in action and in the space from other parties and everything. And I used to go to like other meetings and stuff like that and hear people be like, oh, there's going to be a big green size in the council elections and we're going to see it all happen. And it's just like, actually, I want to be a part of that and keep it going. But honestly, I work in the audiovisual space, and I get to listen to a lot of these corporations speak about, how they influence government and how they want less red tape in like housing and property development. And I'm just like, I can't believe that they just keep on getting away with this. And we have people in power who just are happy letting this through, and we need to stop that and see change, because you're not going to get it without standing up to these corporations and institutions and saying, no, as a community, we need to fight back.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, and I think you and I both share this sort of theory of change around, like, it's not just about individuals getting into positions of power, but it's about how do we build grassroots community organising capacity, right?
Absolutely. It's not just one of us who can do something. We can't place that pressure on ourselves, because if we go forward and just one person gets in, we're not going to see much change happen, because the community is still disconnected from that politician, and then there's not much feedback happening. It's just going to repeat the same cycle. We need to see more people who turn to the community and say, hey, what do you want to see, and what do we want to have happen for our city's future? And really drive it from the community up. So, absolutely. I agree.
Well said. And I mean, like, I guess thinking about, so your Tennyson ward, which is sort of like not I wouldn't say the inner south, but like just beyond the city's inner south. So what part of the city is that?
It's just south of South Brisbane, from around Fairfield through to Oxley, through like Yurongpilly, Yeronga, Sherwood, and all those areas. But it really follows the Meow River or Brisbane River, as it's so called. But it's been really impacted by floods over the years and has really been left behind in council's list of priorities, especially with a lot of public parks not being cleaned up after the floods, long after they happened. And there seems to be a real disconnect between council and the area, and I'd just love to see more action happen there,
Yeah, and it is an interesting part of the town because a lot of people who've been priced out of the inner city are now moving into suburbs like Fairfield, absolutely. And partly because of the flooding, a lot of that real estate was a bit cheaper, and so rents maybe were still a little bit lower and house prices were a little bit lower, but now prices are rising everywhere, and so rents are still getting really unaffordable, even in houses that are extremely prone to flooding.
Precisely. Going on what you were saying, when I was in the process of moving last year, we were priced out of South Brisbane. We had a $90 rent increase from a place that flooded, even though we were like 28 stories up. But we actually applied for a place in Fairfield and went onto the flood map onto council's website and be like, yep, it was there, and yet they're charging an obscene amount of money for this place, and no warning that it was flooded just that same year previously. And so many people being priced out and moved to these areas, and a lot of people aren't aware of how much risk there is in that sort of space. Council just says, "Oh, it's just 1 in 100 years." Well, there's been 2. There's been like 3 in the last time.
And I think that's, definitely one of the biggest issues in Tennyson Ward seems to be flood vulnerability. And one of the things the Greens are really pushing for in this campaign is to stop private developers building more housing on land that's highly prone to flooding, because clearly that's just making the problem worse. It's putting more people in positions of risk. And so definitely the message is we need to be building new housing on higher ground, not on these really low-lying floodplains. But we also need to start thinking about, A, like how do we improve drainage and that sort of stuff, but B, how do we actually support more people to relocate out of these spaces so that if there are people who don't want to live on the floodplain anymore, but they can't afford to move anywhere else, part of the Greens message is that actually council should be buying up these houses basically at full market value.
Absolutely.
Because no one's going to want to sell if the money they get in doesn't allow them to buy a place somewhere else. So the council and the state government and federal government, whoever can come up with the money, needs to support people to relocate. And so, we've had voluntary flood buyback schemes in the past, but often there's not that much money allocated to them, or the windows are too short and people miss out on those offers from the government. But I think we need to start talking seriously about, okay, which are the streets in Yurongpilly or Fairfield or wherever that are really flood prone, and that we do have to maybe talk about relocating people, because we know with global warming, flooding is going to become more frequent and more severe, right?
Absolutely. And we need to build a more resilient community and more resilient city as well. And I think a lot of people can get almost disenfranchised when council only offers a little bit less than market rate for their places and not really much incentive. They can feel a little bit hard done by from them, and they might not be willing to move as a result of that. But realistically, we need people to be okay with going away from floodlands if they want to, and building that area to be more resilient towards flooding and make it better for the whole community as a whole.
Yeah, and I think one thing we'll probably be talking about a bit more in a couple months during the campaign is this idea of because sometimes there are developers who don't want to sell, they've got a really flood-prone block, and the council's well, we'll buy that and turn that into parkland, but the developer's no, I don't want your money.
Just going to land bank on it.
Yeah, and then 5 years later they build townhouses there, and then 10 years later those townhouses flood, and everyone's how is this allowed to happen? So we actually have to also have a nuanced conversation about saying to particularly investors and land bankers, no, even if you don't want to sell, this land is so flood prone that we are going to have to turn it into parkland whether you like it or not. And that's sometimes a tricky conversation to have in a capitalist system where everyone's obsessed with private property rights. But realistically, we have to be thinking about long-term resilience. So yeah, tell me, River, what else is important in that part of the city? What other issues are you hearing from residents?
Absolutely. Well, there's a huge lack of transport in the area. There's been a lot of transport actually getting taken away as a result of the metro project.
Right.
Also people are complaining that they can't get to buses and there's not adequate bus shelters. But honestly, I think that the whole node to city model has really never worked for Meanjin Brisbane because it just gets people in and out of the city and doesn't connect them with the suburbs. We need more public transport to connect into the suburbs and also with our forests as well, because as everything heats up, we need places to go to cool down, and what better than going to our forests and experiencing what nature has to offer and take a break from all that capitalist realism. I think we need to see a public transport system that's actually built for the community and not for people who can just pay for it.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a good point. And that's something, like, I think we were chatting a few weeks ago with Tiana, who's our candidate for Northgate Ward, and she was saying the same thing about how it's often pretty easy to get a bus or a train into the city centre and back out.
Yeah.
But it's harder to move across the city, like from one suburb to another suburb. And so it's almost like the entire transport system is designed around how do we move 9 to 5 office workers in and out of the CBD without thinking about how do people get to the local shops, or how do they get to their friend's house 2 suburbs over, or what happens if you don't work in the city but if you work in another part of suburbia, but you're still forced into this sort of radial network. And I think, that's definitely something that like Tennyson Ward struggles, because there is a train line, and there's stations along for like Sherwood and Fairfield. Like you can get a train into the city, but going anywhere else, you kind of, it's a multi-stage journey with multiple bus changes, or it's like driving. And so there are these big problems with traffic congestion, even though the area is fairly low density in population.
Yeah, exactly. And like, not alone with traffic, people on bikes and accessible means of transport can't really get around effectively because we just have such a car-centric viewpoint, and how we've structured our city's layout has just been based on cars, and we haven't really kept any of that old infrastructure that we used to have, like light rail or anything like that. And I think it's important to move more towards building accessible pathways and access ways and like bikeways, and also separated bike lanes along, like, especially say like Fairfield Road and stuff like that, to try to make it more for the people and not just cars, because
Big time.
we need to be able to move the masses and have people to have that choice, not just get into gas guzzling cars and
and that's
go 5 minutes down the road and they could have just walked.
Yeah, and that's basically what climate action is at the local level, right? It's shifting away from car dependence, because we know that for a lot of Brisbane residents and businesses and industries, like, so much of the carbon footprint is petrol, right? It's just burning fossil fuels to move things and move people around. So if we're serious about action on climate change and reducing fossil fuel consumption and emissions, then we need to give people alternatives to drive in.
Absolutely. And I think when you start to shift away from that, people can become more happy and more aware of that, and they might be a lot more connected because they're not just in a cage of a car, and they can be more open and expressive and have more time in the day, I guess. Other things that I think are really important in the area is a lack of activated green space. You have a lot of areas where there's just lawn, and it'd be great to see some like people go in with community garden projects, or like even like guerrilla projects and stuff, to try activate those spaces and make it actual like areas for community to interact and hang out. Because if there's no shaded areas and just lawn, it's not really appealing for many people to go to, especially families and people who are really worried about getting bad sunburn and everything. It'd be great to see more activated areas, especially for wildlife as well, improving our wildlife corridors and things like that.
Yeah.
And we should really be looking at buying back even like golf courses and things to turn into parkland, so we have more options available to people.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. And I think Tennyson Ward in particular is interesting because a lot of land was preserved as green space because of how flood prone it was. You do have a lot of big parks that are basically just lawn. And as you say, like, there's a lot of green space around in some of those neighborhoods, but it's not necessarily particularly usable because there's not many shade trees and there's not many park facilities. It's literally just lawn with some trees around the edges. And I agree with you that we need to be thinking about how can we transform these. They call them parks, but they're literally just lawns. Transform them into spaces that people can use, but that also provide habitat for a wider range of native species. And that means like not just planting trees, but also planting garden beds and understory vegetation and like shrubs and climbing vines and all that sort of stuff. So there's that multi-layered forest ecosystem that actually provides meaningful habitat for native species, and will also keep the suburb cooler, and will also mean we probably have to spend less money on mowing because the council spends a lot of money on just mowing grass. But I also like the idea of thinking about suburbs like Fairfield and those low-lying flood-prone parks as potentially a good space for gardening or food production of some kind or another, because that's, we do need to be growing more food within the urban footprint, and maybe those are the spaces where some of that can happen.
Absolutely. And if we really want to foster localism, then we're not going to get it if we don't have a lot of that like garden to kitchen areas where we can really see people getting connected through growing their own food organically and then taking it home and cooking it themselves and getting that pride out of the fact that they helped grow that and being able to connect with others around that thing and helping people not be hungry.
So I also wanted to ask you, River, about like a lot of us are obviously really passionate about Greens politics, but sometimes we're stuck in these like bubbles where we're only talking to other people who already agree with us. Like, how do you think we push against that, and how do we get outside of the bubble to reach more people with these ideas?
Absolutely. Well, I think it's really important to, like, you have all of your standard things like holding town halls and going door knocking and everything like that, but it'd be great to just see just small groups in the community really get together and try to encourage others to get involved and participate, because we can only go so far into reaching out and like throwing out, hey, come along to this event, we're doing a cool thing. But if we don't actually connect with those local community groups, we're not going to get any of that excitement or any of that belief around that area. So we really need to be connecting with a lot of the different areas and into the different like nodes, like social enterprises and small businesses and stuff like that, to see if anyone in there is interested. Because like it's not the usual green space, but it's still good to connect with people and see what their thoughts are. And I think that especially with a area where we don't really think we're going to win it, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't still be going out and connecting with people and talking to people. I think that, social media has a lot of a role to play, and we need to think about how we're actually delivering those messages, because a lot of times they can just fall on deaf ears, and but we just keep on beating the same strum and wondering why people don't come to our events or anything like that. But I think I don't think we all know how to connect with everyone, but I think if we just do it at a small level from the ground up to building it up, from just like trying to get involved in seeing what help can be needs to be had in an area, and just trying to go out and see what needs to be done, and like getting involved in community groups or other things, getting away from that like standard political things and just trying to go in and be like, hey, we're here for change, what can we do?
Yeah, nice one. Yeah, I think I think we're on the same page with that stuff. And I think you're right that it's running for elections isn't just about like winning votes and winning seats. It's also about building community connections and spreading ideas. So like, whether you win or not, it's about like, I have more people engaged with these ideas and thought deeply about this stuff that we're talking about. We're almost out of time, but I wanted to throw one last question at you, and maybe you don't have much to say on this, but like, there's this sort of narrative that young people are really disengaged from politics, or that they don't pay much attention. Do you think that's true? And if it's true, what do we do to engage more young people in these political conversations?
Absolutely. Well, I felt it since I was young. You see so many politicians not listen to what a lot of our parents have been saying for years. So I was really brought up on that whole like being frugal and caring for our environment and everything like that. And whenever I'd look to our politicians, I wouldn't see any of those same models or ethos replicated. You would just see them being focused on big business and the rich and, the more elderly. And I'd say that young people have really been left behind by the political institution. And I think that it is very much felt in there because a lot of politicians don't go far enough into reaching out to young people and trying to see what they actually would like. And I really see it amongst my peers. They do feel a lot more disenfranchised by the whole system. But I think it's great to reconnect with them by actually saying, by starting to say those things that they're actually turned on to, like climate action and social justice, because I feel like a lot more of us are aware of that now, and a lot of the political institutions still aren't and still continue to leave that behind and not go far enough. They just tinker at the top and don't drive that change from the bottom. And I think that it would be great to, I think that young people is really trying to more shift towards that bottom-up approach. And I see it a lot more amongst my peers. But I really feel that some of them just don't know and will just go off of what their parents vote for. And you really just have to get in there and say, hey, what do you care about? Vote for who you care about, and, look at all the different parties who say things that align with you. And trying to empower, which there isn't many, but try to empower them from their beliefs and for their vote.
And don't just vote the way your parents vote.
Exactly.
Well said. Well, thanks for this chat, River. It's really cool to see you running, and I'm excited to see the ideas that bubble up from the community and that you're pushing forward over the next 6 months. Good luck with the campaign, I guess.
Thank you so much. Cheers.
Thanks. See you later.
See you.